The ancient citadel of Valethorn stood like a jagged tooth against the crimson sky, its obsidian towers reaching toward the dying stars. Within its highest chamber, Corvanus the Eternal gazed through crystal windows at the approaching wall of fire that devoured everything in its path. The Dragon Lord's scaled hide gleamed like molten gold in the reflected light of destruction, his massive form coiled around pillars carved from single gemstones. For 3,000 years, he had ruled the 7 realms with wisdom and terrible power. Dragons from across the galaxy came to seek his counsel, entire civilizations bent the knee before his ancient might, and the very stars themselves seemed to acknowledge his dominion. Yet now, as he watched the consuming fire advance across his territories, Corvanus felt something he had not experienced in millennia: helplessness. The fire was not natural. It burned without fuel, spread without wind, and consumed not just matter but the very essence of reality itself. Wherever it passed, nothing remained. Not ash, not memory, not even the possibility that something had once existed there. It had already claimed the outer reaches, the crystal moons, and the singing nebulae. Now it approached the heart of his realm, and all his power seemed insignificant before its relentless advance. A soft knock echoed through the vast chamber, so quiet that only his enhanced hearing could detect it. Corvanus turned his massive head toward the entrance, his golden eyes narrowing. No one dared disturb him without permission, especially not now when the end of everything approached. The great doors, each weighing more than a small starship, remained sealed by his will. "Enter," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of eons and the rumble of distant thunder. The doors swung open silently, and a figure stepped through that made the Dragon Lord pause in surprise. It was a human, a young woman by their brief standards, perhaps 25 solar years old. She wore simple brown leather clothing and carried no weapons, no artifacts of power, no symbols of rank or authority. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her green eyes held a determination that seemed almost absurd given the circumstances. Corvanus had encountered humans before, of course. They were a relatively new species in the galactic community, having achieved interstellar travel only a few centuries ago. Most were unremarkable, short-lived creatures who burned brightly and faded quickly, leaving little impact on the greater cosmos. This one appeared no different, yet something about her steady gaze gave him pause. "You dare enter my sanctum uninvited?" he asked, lowering his great head until it was level with hers. Each of his teeth was longer than her entire body, and flames flickered between them as he spoke. "Do you not know that worlds have been scoured clean for lesser offenses?" The human woman, or lass, as her species sometimes called their young females, did not flinch or step back. Instead, she performed a small, respectful bow and met his eyes directly. "My lord Corvanus, I am Sarah Chen of Earth. I come seeking an audience because our worlds face extinction together." "Sarah Chen," he repeated, tasting the alien syllables. Human names were strange to his ancient tongue, lacking the resonant power of true names spoken in the dragon language. "Your species barely knows of our existence. How did you even reach this place?" She reached into her leather satchel and withdrew a small device, holding it out for his inspection. It was clearly human technology, crude by his standards but functional. "We've been monitoring the consuming fire for 6 months now. Our scientists calculated its path and predicted it would reach your citadel before Earth. We came to warn you." Corvanus almost laughed, a sound that would have shattered lesser beings. "Warn me? Child, I have watched civilizations rise and fall since before your son was born. I have battled cosmic storms and devoured the hearts of dying stars. What could your infant species possibly tell me that I do not already know?" Sarah's composure remained steady, though he could smell the fear on her. Not of him, interestingly, but of the fire that approached them all. "We know what it is," she said simply, "and we think we know how to stop it." Now the Dragon Lord was truly intrigued. He shifted his massive form, scales scraping against stone as he leaned closer. "Explain." "The consuming fire isn't a natural phenomenon or even an artificial weapon," Sarah began, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Our quantum physicists identified its true nature 3 weeks ago. It's a cascade failure in the fundamental structure of reality itself. Something or someone found a way to convince the universe that certain regions of space-time never existed in the first place." Corvanus's eyes widened. In all his vast knowledge, accumulated over millennia of study and conquest, he had never conceived of such a thing. Impossible. The laws that govern existence cannot simply be rewritten. "Not rewritten," Sarah corrected. "Convinced. Reality is more fragile than most species realize. It's held together by a kind of cosmic consensus, the agreement of all matter and energy that things should exist as they do. The consuming fire works by breaking that consensus, introducing doubt into the very fabric of space-time." The Dragon Lord was silent for a long moment, processing this impossible claim. His mind, vast and ancient, reached out across dimensions to test her theory against what he was witnessing. The more he considered it, the more it explained the inexplicable nature of the fire's advance. "Even if this is true," he said finally, "what solution could your species possibly offer? If reality itself is under attack, what power do humans possess that could restore it?" Sarah took a deep breath, and for the first time since entering his chamber, she looked uncertain. "That's complicated. Our scientists believe the solution requires something that dragons, for all their power, might find difficult to provide." "And what might that be?" "Faith," she said quietly. "Not in gods or mythology, but in the simple, absolute certainty that things should exist as they are. Dragons think in terms of power and dominion, of bending reality to their will. But sometimes the universe needs something gentler, a quiet, stubborn insistence that things are real because they matter, not because they're strong." Corvanus reared back as if struck. "You suggest that my power is insufficient?" "I suggest that power alone isn't the answer," Sarah replied, standing her ground despite the heat radiating from his suddenly incandescent scales. "The consuming fire feeds on dominance, on the idea that the strong can simply erase what they find inconvenient. Fighting it with more force only makes it stronger." The Dragon Lord considered her words, his ancient mind struggling with concepts that challenged everything he had believed for millennia. Outside his windows, the wall of fire crept closer, now visible as a dark line on the horizon, where stars simply ceased to exist. "Your scientists," he said slowly, "what solution do they propose?" Sarah's hand moved to a small pendant at her throat, and Corvanus caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a simple metal disc. Iron, he realized, one of the most common and unremarkable elements in the universe. They believe that reality can be reinforced by conscious beings who absolutely refuse to accept its negation, but it requires connection, unity of purpose across species and individuals. "You speak in riddles, human." "I speak of holding hands," Sarah said, and her cheeks colored slightly. "I know how it sounds to a being like you, but human cultures have always understood something that more powerful species often miss. That connection between individuals can create strength greater than the sum of its parts. Not magical strength or cosmic power, just certainty. The unshakable knowledge that we exist, that we matter, that reality is worth preserving." Corvanus stared at her, his massive intellect trying to process this absurd suggestion. Hold hands? He was the Lord of Dragons, the eternal flame, the keeper of cosmic secrets. His claws could rend mountains, his breath could melt starship hulls, and his very presence could drive lesser beings to madness. The idea of something as trivial as hand-holding having any relevance to cosmic catastrophe seemed beyond preposterous. Yet as he watched the approaching fire, he found himself remembering fragments of his earliest existence before power and dominion had defined him. There had been others then, other dragons, other beings, connections that had meant something beyond mere alliance or servitude. When was the last time he had touched another being without intent to dominate or destroy? "The fire will reach us within hours," Sarah continued, seemingly unaware of his internal struggle. "Our calculations show that once it engulfs your citadel, the cascade failure will become irreversible. This is literally our last chance." "And you believe that physical contact between us could somehow restore universal consensus?" The words felt strange in his mouth, concepts so foreign to his nature that speaking them required effort. "Not just us," Sarah said, pulling out her device again. "We've been in contact with representatives from 47 different species. They're all waiting for word from here. If we can demonstrate that the technique works, that connection can truly reinforce reality against the fire. Then we can spread it across the galaxy before the cascade becomes complete." The Dragon Lord extended one massive claw, bringing it to rest inches from the human woman's face. She could have been obliterated by the smallest movement, yet she remained perfectly still, meeting his gaze without flinching. In her eyes he saw something he had forgotten existed, not courage born of power or desperation, but simple, absolute conviction. "You would risk everything," he said softly, "based on the untested theories of a species that has barely left its birth world." "I would risk everything," Sarah agreed, "to save everything." Outside, the first tendrils of the consuming fire reached the outer walls of his citadel, and Corvanus felt reality itself begin to fray at the edges of his domain. Ancient stones that had stood for millennia started to flicker, their existence becoming uncertain. Time was running out, and all his vast power seemed useless against an enemy that simply convinced the universe to forget he had ever existed. The Dragon Lord slowly extended his great foreclaw, turning it palm upward in an approximation of human gesture. His hand was easily the size of Sarah's entire torso, scales harder than any known material gleaming in the firelight from outside. "Show me," he rumbled, his voice carrying the weight of his desperate hope and 3,000 years of pride finally set aside. "Show me how a Dragon Lord might hold the hand of a human lass, and perhaps together we can remind reality that it should not so easily be convinced to abandon what it has taken eons to create." Sarah stared at the massive claw extended before her, its surface marked by countless battles and inscribed with runes that seemed to shift and flow in the dying light. Each scale was larger than her palm, and she could feel the heat radiating from Corvanus's skin like standing near a forge. This close, she could see the intricate patterns etched into his hide by time and cosmic forces, each mark telling a story of power beyond her comprehension. Yet despite his overwhelming presence, she sensed something else beneath the surface, uncertainty, perhaps even vulnerability. The mighty Dragon Lord, who had ruled galaxies and commanded the respect of entire civilizations, was as lost as she was in the face of annihilation. "I should explain," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "that human connection isn't just about physical contact. It requires trust, shared purpose, and genuine care for one another's well-being. Otherwise, it's just touching." Corvanus tilted his massive head, golden eyes studying her with new interest. "You speak of caring for my well-being? I am immortal, child. I have witnessed the birth and death of stars. What concern could I possibly need from a creature who will age and die in mere decades?" Sarah carefully placed her small hand on the center of his palm. feeling the surprising warmth and smoothness of his scales. "Everyone needs to know they matter," she said simply. "Even dragon lords, especially dragon lords maybe, because you carry so much responsibility alone." The moment their skin made contact, something extraordinary happened. Not the explosive release of magical energy that Corvanus had expected, nor the overwhelming surge of psychic power he was accustomed to. Instead, there was a quiet settling, like a puzzle piece clicking into place after millennia of searching. He felt her pulse through her fingertips, rapid but steady, mortal but determined. And for the first time in ages beyond counting, he was not alone. Through the simple connection of flesh against scale, Corvanus became aware of Sarah's inner world in ways that went beyond telepathy or mental dominance. He sensed her memories, a blue-green world called Earth, with vast oceans and sprawling cities, filled with billions of humans living their brief, passionate lives. He felt her love for her home, her determination to protect not just her own species but all life in the galaxy, and her absolute conviction that existence itself was worth fighting for. More surprisingly, he began to understand what she meant by faith in reality. Humans, he realized, lived every day with the constant awareness of their own mortality, yet they chose to build, to love, to hope anyway. They invested their fleeting time in projects they would never see completed, in relationships that would inevitably end, in dreams that extended far beyond their individual lifespans. This was not the cosmic perspective of immortal beings who could afford to think in terms of eons, but something else entirely. A fierce, stubborn insistence on meaning despite impermanence. "By the ancient fires," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "Your species! You live with entropy as a constant companion, yet you never stop believing that tomorrow will come." Sarah smiled, tightening her grip on his claw. "We have to. What else is there?" Around them, the consuming fire reached the outer walls of the citadel, and reality began to waver more dramatically. The ancient stones flickered between existence and void, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent, sometimes simply gone before snapping back into being. But in the space between Sarah and Corvanus, something different was happening. The air itself seemed more solid, more present, as if their connection was creating a pocket of reinforced reality. "It's working," Sarah breathed, pulling out her device with her free hand. "The quantum readings are stabilizing in a 5-meter radius around us. The cascade effect is being held back." Corvanus felt it too, a strengthening of the fundamental forces that held matter and energy in their proper configurations. But more than that, he felt the strange power that flowed from their joined hands. Not his power, which came from dominion and will imposed upon reality, but something gentler and infinitely more persistent. It was the power of beings who chose to exist fully, despite knowing their existence was temporary, who loved deeply, despite knowing loss was inevitable, who built civilizations, despite knowing they would someday crumble. "Contact the others," he commanded, his voice carrying new authority born not of dominance, but of shared purpose. "Tell them it works, but they must understand, this is not merely strategic alliance. This is connection between souls." Sarah activated her device, and within moments, holographic images filled the chamber. Representatives of dozens of species appeared, the crystalline Zephyrians with their singing voices, the massive thunder beasts of Proxima 7, the ethereal energy beings of the void reaches, and many others. All of them were facing the same approaching doom, and all had been waiting for word from the Citadel. "The technique is confirmed," Sarah announced to the assembly. "But Lord Corvanus is right. It requires genuine connection, not just physical contact. You need to find beings with whom you can share trust, purpose, and care." A Zephyrian chimed in confusion. "Define care in this context. Our species experiences emotional attachment differently than organics." Corvanus surprised himself by answering. Care means accepting that the well-being of another matters to you, he said slowly, as if working through an alien concept. It means that their continued existence makes the universe more complete, more worth preserving. The holographic figures exchanged glances, or their species equivalent. Many of them had lived for centuries or millennia without forming such bonds, viewing emotional connection as weakness or unnecessary complication. But as reports came in from across the galaxy showing the consuming fire's relentless advance, pragmatism began to override philosophical reservations. One by one, the representatives began reaching out to find partners for the connection ritual. The process was awkward at first. Beings who had never touched another in friendship, struggling to understand the concept of supportive physical contact. But gradually, success stories began filtering in. A Zephyrian diplomat and a human engineer on the colony world of Haven managed to create a small pocket of stable reality. Two thunderbeasts on the mining asteroid of Pharos VII joined their massive hands and held back the cascade for several city blocks. Each successful connection seemed to strengthen the others, creating a network of reinforced reality that began spreading across the galaxy like inverse fire, bringing solidity and certainty where there had been doubt and dissolution. But as Sarah monitored the readings, her expression grew troubled. "It's working, but not fast enough," she reported. "The fire is still advancing faster than we can establish connection points. We need something more concentrated." Corvanus understood immediately. A focal point. A connection so strong that it can anchor the entire network. He looked down at their joined hands, then met Sarah's eyes. "You realize what this means?" Sarah nodded gravely. "The mathematics are clear. To create a connection powerful enough to serve as a galactic anchor point, we would need to maintain contact until the fire either consumes us or is completely turned back. Hours at least, possibly days. And the energies involved," Corvanus trailed off, but they both understood. The strain of maintaining such an intense connection would be enormous. For Sarah, a mortal human with a limited lifespan, it could mean shortening her already brief existence by decades. For Corvanus, it would mean opening his ancient, carefully guarded consciousness completely to another being for an extended period, a vulnerability he had never allowed himself since his earliest youth. "I won't ask this of you," Sarah said firmly. "You've already done more than anyone could expect. Find another partner, someone of your own species, perhaps. The network will hold." Corvanus was quiet for a long moment, studying this remarkable human who had entered his citadel with nothing but determination and faith. In his vast experience, he had known beings who would sacrifice themselves for power, for glory, for the survival of their species, but he had never before met someone willing to face oblivion simply because existence itself mattered to her. "Sarah Chen of Earth," he said formally, "I have ruled the 7 realms for 3,000 years. I have commanded fleets of starships, dragons beyond counting, and the respect of civilizations, but I have never had a friend." Sarah's eyes widened at the simple admission. "I find," Corvanus continued, "that I would prefer not to face the end of everything alone. If you are willing to risk your life to save reality itself, then perhaps an old dragon can learn what it means to care for someone other than himself." Through their joined hands, Sarah felt the depth of his commitment, not just to the mission, but to her. Despite their vast differences in age, power, and species, something genuine had formed between them in the space of an hour. It wasn't romantic love as humans understood it, nor was it the simple affection of friendship. It was something new, born of shared purpose and mutual recognition of worth. "Together, then," Sarah said. and her smile was radiant enough to make the Dragon Lord's ancient heart skip a beat. Let's show the universe what happens when a human lass and a Dragon Lord refuse to let reality give up on itself. As they settled into position for the extended connection ritual, the consuming fire reached the inner walls of the citadel. Reality began dissolving around them in earnest now, ancient tapestries fading to nothing, carved stone columns flickering in and out of existence, entire sections of floor becoming transparent before snapping back to solidity. But between Sarah and Corvanus, the pocket of reinforced reality grew stronger and more stable with each passing moment. Their connection, powered by growing trust and shared determination, began reaching out across the galaxy through the network they had helped establish. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of beings felt their influence, drawing strength from the simple but profound bond between a mighty dragon and a determined human. The real battle for the galaxy's existence was about to begin. The extended connection ritual began at the moment the consuming fire breached the inner sanctum of the citadel. Sarah and Corvanus sat facing each other in the center of the great chamber, her small hands clasped around one of his massive claws, both of them surrounded by an ever-expanding sphere of stabilized reality that pulsed with their combined will to exist. What had started as simple physical contact had evolved into something far more profound. Through their joined consciousness, Sarah experienced fragments of Corvanus's vast memory, the birth of galaxies, the first tentative steps of civilizations reaching toward the stars, the loneliness of immortal existence carrying the weight of cosmic responsibility. Meanwhile, Corvanus was overwhelmed by the intensity of human experience. Every emotion magnified by mortality, every moment precious because it could not last forever, every connection treasured because it was chosen rather than imposed. "I never understood," he whispered, his great voice trembling with revelation. "How beings who live such brief lives could possess such fierce certainty about existence." Sarah's consciousness flowed alongside his, sharing not just her individual experiences, but the collective memory of her species. Corvanus saw through her eyes the long journey of humanity from primitive tribes to interstellar civilization, driven always by the same stubborn refusal to accept that their lives were meaningless simply because they were temporary. He witnessed their wars and their peace treaties, their scientific breakthroughs and artistic masterpieces, their endless capacity to hope despite knowing that death awaited every individual. "We exist because we choose to," Sarah replied, her voice echoing strangely in their shared mental space. "Not because we're powerful enough to demand it, but because we believe our existence has value. That's what the consuming fire can't understand. That meaning isn't imposed from above by cosmic forces. It's created from within by beings who decide their lives matter." Around them, the battle for reality itself intensified. The network of connections they had helped establish now spanned dozens of worlds, with thousands of beings maintaining the delicate bonds that held space-time together. But the consuming fire had adapted to their resistance, growing stronger as it learned to target not just matter and energy, but the connections themselves. Through their shared awareness, Sarah and Corvanus felt each connection point across the galaxy as it came under assault. They experienced the terror of a Zephyrian diplomat as her crystalline form began to dissolve, saved only by her human partner's absolute refusal to believe she could simply cease to exist. They shared the determination of two thunder beasts who stood firm against dissolution even as the ground beneath their feet flickered between reality and void. They felt the quiet courage of beings from hundreds of species who had never before opened themselves to such vulnerability, now risking everything for the sake of universal existence. But the strain was enormous. Each successful defense against the fire required conscious effort, a constant choice to affirm reality against an enemy that whispered insidiously that existence was too much trouble, too much pain, too temporary to be worth preserving. Weaker connections began to fail, their participants exhausted by the mental effort required to maintain certainty in the face of cosmic doubt. "We're losing ground," Sarah reported, though her voice remained steady. Through her device, she could see the network contracting as connection points failed across the galaxy. "The fire is learning to target the bonds between individuals. It's convincing beings that connection itself is futile." Corvanus felt the truth of her words, as several of his own dragon descendants broke their connections with other beings, retreating into the isolation that had always defined their species. The ancient pride that had sustained dragons for eons now worked against them, whispering that they needed no one, that dependency was weakness, that true strength came only from solitary power. "Then we must anchor not just reality," Corvanus said grimly, "but the very concept of connection itself. Show them what we have found together." Sarah understood immediately. Instead of simply maintaining their own bond, they began broadcasting it through the network, sharing not just their individual certainty about existence, but their discovery of strength through unity. Across the galaxy, struggling beings suddenly felt the depth of connection possible between two completely different species, the way trust and care could transcend every barrier of biology, culture, and power. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Failing connection points stabilized as their participants remembered why they had chosen to reach out to each other in the first place. New bonds formed spontaneously, as beings who had never considered such relationships found themselves drawn to share the burden of existence with others. The network didn't just grow, it transformed, becoming something organic and self-sustaining rather than merely tactical. But the consuming fire responded with fury to this development. Unable to convince connected beings that they should cease to exist, it began targeting the connections themselves more directly. Sarah and Corvanus, as the primary anchor point, bore the brunt of this assault. The attack came not as physical force but as pure negation, a whisper that grew to a roar, insisting that their connection was impossible, that beings so different could never truly understand each other, that all relationships were ultimately illusion-masking fundamental isolation. The fire showed them visions of failure, Sarah aging and dying while Corvanus continued his immortal existence, their brief friendship becoming just another forgotten moment in his vast lifetime. It showed Corvanus the limitations of human understanding, their inability to truly comprehend cosmic forces, the inevitable disappointment he would face when their connection proved shallow compared to his deeper needs. For a moment, doubt crept into their shared consciousness. Sarah felt the vast gulf between her mortal existence and Corvanus's immortality, wondered if she was presuming too much in thinking their friendship could be real. Corvanus experienced the claustrophobia of emotional dependency, the fear that opening himself to another being made him vulnerable in ways his draconic nature could never accept. The network began to waver as their anchor point weakened. "It's working," Sarah gasped, struggling against the psychic assault. "The fire is making us doubt ourselves, doubt each other. I can feel the other connections starting to fail." But even as she spoke, Corvanus felt something extraordinary happen. Instead of retreating into isolation as his instincts demanded, he found himself drawing closer to Sarah's consciousness, not despite their differences, but because of them. Her mortality didn't make their friendship meaningless. It made it precious. Her limited understanding of cosmic forces didn't diminish her worth. It provided perspective his vast knowledge had never offered. Their connection wasn't weakened by their differences. It was strengthened by the conscious choice to bridge them. "The fire lies," he said, his mental voice ringing with newfound certainty. It tells us that connection is impossible because differences are too great, but it has the truth backwards. Connection isn't possible despite our differences. It exists because we choose to value each other across those differences. Sarah felt his realization flowing through their bond, and her own doubts dissolved in the face of a more profound understanding. The consuming fire worked by convincing reality to doubt itself, to question whether existence was worth the trouble. But connection between conscious beings was the ultimate affirmation that existence mattered, that the universe was better with others in it than without them. Together, they pushed back against the fire's assault, their combined will reinforced by every being across the galaxy who had chosen to reach across the void between self and other. The network didn't just stabilize, it expanded exponentially as their revelation spread through every connection point. Beings who had been struggling to maintain their bonds suddenly understood that the difficulty itself was proof of the bond's reality and value. The consuming fire, faced with a universe that refused to doubt its own worth, began to falter for the first time. Its advance slowed, then stopped entirely as it encountered pockets of reality so thoroughly convinced of their own existence that negation became impossible. The cascade failure that had threatened to unmake everything reversed itself, rolling back across the galaxy like a tide of affirmation. But the victory came at a cost. The extended connection ritual had pushed both Sarah and Corvanus beyond their limits. Sarah's human physiology, never designed for such intense psychic communion, was beginning to fail. Corvanus felt her life force flickering like a candle in a strong wind, sustained only by her determination not to break their connection, while beings across the galaxy still depended on their anchor point. "You're killing yourself," he said, his voice heavy with anguish he had never expected to feel. "Release the connection. The network is stable now. You don't need to sacrifice yourself." Sarah's physical form was nearly transparent, her consciousness maintained more by will than by biological function. But her mental voice remained strong. "I'm not sacrificing myself," she said with quiet joy. "I'm choosing to live completely, right up to the end. This is what it means to be human, Corvanus. We don't just exist. We exist with purpose." Through their fading bond, Corvanus felt the truth of her words. Sarah wasn't dying. She was blazing, burning her brief existence like a star going supernova, pouring everything she was into the moment that mattered most. Her mortality, which he had seen as limitation, revealed itself as the ultimate strength. The knowledge that time was precious made every second count for more than immortal eons. But the Dragon Lord had not ruled galaxies for 3 millennia without learning that some battles were worth fighting even when they seemed hopeless. Drawing on power reserves he had never tapped, cosmic forces he had been saving for his own potential end, Corvanus began pouring his immortal essence into their connection, not to dominate or control, but to share, to give Sarah some portion of his endless time so that their friendship might continue beyond the arbitrary limits of biology. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, feeling the flow of his life force into her fading body. "Learning," Corvanus replied simply. "That immortality means nothing if it's not shared with someone who makes existence worthwhile." The exchange stabilized both of them, creating something new, not human, not dragon, but a partnership that transcended the limitations of either species. Sarah's form solidified, sustained by Corvanus's gift of time, while the Dragon Lord found his own immortality enriched by her perspective on mortality's meaning. Across the galaxy, the last remnants of the consuming fire flickered and died, unable to convince a universe filled with genuine connections that existence was worthless. Reality reasserted itself completely, space-time healing from the cascade failure, like wounds closing. The network of connections remained, no longer necessary for survival, but maintained by beings who had discovered the value of conscious unity. As the immediate crisis passed, Sarah and Corvanus found themselves still holding hands in the center of the great chamber. But everything had changed. They were no longer just a human and a dragon who had briefly cooperated. They were something new, a permanent bond between species and individuals that would reshape how both civilizations understood their place in the universe. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked, looking around at the restored citadel with wonder. Corvanus's golden eyes sparkled with possibilities he had never considered in 3,000 years of existence. "Now we teach the galaxy something it has never learned," he said, "that the strongest force in the universe isn't power over others, but power shared between them. That connection doesn't make us weak. It makes us more than we could ever be alone." Sarah squeezed his claw gently, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. "The human lass and the dragon lord," she said with a grin. "I think we're going to scandalize a lot of civilizations." "Good," Corvanus rumbled, his laughter echoing through dimensions. They could use the education. Outside the crystal windows, the stars shone with steady light, no longer threatened by the void that had nearly consumed them all, and in the highest chamber of the ancient citadel, two beings from impossibly different worlds continued to hold hands, proving to the universe that connection was not just possible, but essential. The force that made existence not merely real, but meaningful.